The gunshot ripped through the tranquil morning air of Ordway, Colorado, sending Dahlia Turner scrambling for cover behind an overturned wagon as bullets splintered the wood near her head. She hadn't expected her first day as the town's new schoolteacher to begin with a bank robbery, yet here she was, 24 years old, and already convinced that her decision to start fresh in this dusty frontier town had been a grave mistake. "Stay down, madam." A deep voice commanded as a tall figure moved swiftly beside her, the silver star pinned to his leather vest catching the morning sunlight. Dahlia pressed herself flat against the dirt, the taste of dust filling her mouth as another volley of shots rang out. Her heart hammered in her chest, memories of another man's broken promises flooding back. She'd fled St. Louis to escape those memories, yet danger had found her anyway. When the gunfire finally ceased, Dahlia cautiously raised her head to see 3 men being led away in handcuffs while the tall stranger who'd protected her holstered his revolver with practiced ease. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, extending a calloused hand to help her up. Dahlia ignored his offer and stood on her own, brushing dirt from her simple blue traveling dress. "I'm fine," she said curtly, avoiding his gaze. "Name's Tucker Raines," he said, tipping his worn Stetson. "Town sheriff. Don't believe I've had the pleasure." "Dahlia Turner," she replied stiffly. "The new schoolteacher." A smile spread across his sun-weathered face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Well, Miss Turner, I reckon this isn't quite the welcome we had planned for you." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners as he spoke, but Dahlia remained unmoved. "I've learned not to expect much from men or their promises of safety, Sheriff," she said coldly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to find the schoolhouse." As she turned to walk away, Sheriff Raines called after her, "Miss Turner," she paused without turning. "I understand trust is hard to come by these days," he said, his voice softer now. "Especially for a woman on her own, but Ordway's a good town with good people." Dahlia glanced back at him, her green eyes hard with years of disappointment. "I've heard such claims before, Sheriff." "I'll believe it when I see it." "Fair enough," he replied, unfazed by her coldness. "I can see you've been hurt. All I'm asking is that you give this town and its people a chance." "I said I'd never trust a man again," Dahlia stated firmly. The sheriff's expression remained steady as he placed his hat back on his head. "Then I'll just have to earn it day by day," he nodded respectfully. "The schoolhouse is 2 blocks down, red building on the right, mayor's waiting to meet you." As Dahlia walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, but refused to acknowledge the small flutter in her chest at his words. She'd heard pretty promises before from Charles back in St. Louis, promises that had left her heartbroken and nearly destitute when he'd absconded with her savings and the deed to her family home. No, Sheriff Tucker Raines would be no different, she decided. Men were wolves in sheep's clothing, and this dusty Colorado town was just another place to rebuild her life alone. The schoolhouse turned out to be a modest 1-room building with rows of simple wooden desks. Mayor Hopkins, a portly man with an impressive mustache, greeted her enthusiastically. "Miss Turner, we're so pleased you accepted our offer," he said, pumping her hand vigorously. "Our last teacher left rather suddenly to get married, and the children have been without proper schooling for nearly a month." "I'm eager to begin, Mayor," Dahlia replied, surveying the room. It needed work. The chalkboard was cracked, books were scattered haphazardly, and a layer of dust covered everything but it was hers. "A fresh start. Your living quarters are through that door," the mayor continued, pointing to a narrow doorway at the back of the classroom. "It's not fancy, but it's private. The town ladies have prepared it for you." The attached room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small cook stove, and a writing desk positioned beneath the window. It was more than Dahlia had hoped for. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "When can I expect to meet my students?" "Monday morning, bright and early," the mayor replied. "That gives you the weekend to settle in. Oh, and we're having a welcome social for you tomorrow evening at the church. Nothing fancy, just a chance for folks to meet the new schoolmarm." Dahlia nodded, though the thought of being the center of attention made her uncomfortable. After the mayor left, she unpacked her meager belongings: a few dresses, books, her mother's silver-backed hairbrush, and the small photograph of her parents, both long dead. She placed the photo on the bedside table and sat heavily on the bed, finally allowing the events of the morning to wash over her. The bank robbery, the gunfire, and Sheriff Raines with his confident smile and steady gaze. "I'll earn it day by day," he'd said. As if trust were something that could be rebuilt once shattered, Dahlia shook her head and stood up. She had a classroom to organize and lessons to plan. She couldn't afford to dwell on handsome sheriffs with impossible promises. The following evening, Dahlia reluctantly made her way to the church social. She donned her best dress, a forest green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style. As she approached the white clapboard building, the sounds of conversation and laughter floated on the evening air. Mayor Hopkins spotted her immediately and led her around the room, introducing her to what seemed like the entire population of Ordway. She met the doctor and his wife, the blacksmith and his family, the general store owner, and countless farmers and ranchers whose names blurred together. "And of course, you've already met our sheriff," the mayor said as Tucker Raines appeared before them, looking markedly different in clean clothes and without his gun belt. He wore a pressed white shirt, dark trousers, and a black string tie. His sandy hair was neatly combed, and the usual dust of the trail was nowhere to be seen. "Miss Turner," he said with a polite nod, "I hope you're finding Ordway to your liking." "It's adequate," she replied, noting how the lamplight caught the gold flecks in his blue eyes. The mayor chuckled nervously. "Well, I'll let you two get reacquainted. Miss Turner, there's punch and refreshments on the table yonder." He hurried off to greet new arrivals. An awkward silence fell between them until Sheriff Raines cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize for your welcome to town yesterday. Not exactly the first impression we hoped to make." "Do bank robberies happen often in your good town, Sheriff?" Dahlia asked pointedly. "Those men weren't from Ordway," he explained. "They've been hitting small towns all through Colorado. We got word they might be heading our way, but they arrived sooner than expected." "I see," Dahlia said, her tone softening slightly. "Well, you handled it efficiently." "High praise indeed," he replied, a small smile playing at his lips. "Would you care for some punch?" Before she could answer, a small whirlwind in the form of a young girl with blonde braids collided with the sheriff's legs. "Uncle Tucker," the child exclaimed. "You promised to dance with me." Sheriff Raines laughed and scooped the girl up. "That I did, Lily." "Miss Turner, this is my niece, Lily Raines. Her father, my brother, runs the ranch just outside of town. Lily, this is Miss Turner, your new teacher." The little girl regarded Dahlia with curious blue eyes. "Are you going to teach us about Indians and buffalo and explorers?" she asked eagerly. Despite herself, Dahlia smiled. "That and much more. Reading, writing, arithmetic." Lily wrinkled her nose. "I already know my numbers up to 20. "That's a fine start," Dahlia assured her. "Uncle Tucker says learning is as important as knowing how to ride a horse," Lily declared. Dahlia raised an eyebrow at the sheriff. "Does he now? Your uncle sounds like a wise man." "He's the bestest," Lily agreed. "After my pa, of course. Come on, Uncle Tucker, they're playing our song." Sheriff Raines set his niece down with a chuckle. "Duty calls, Miss Turner." "Perhaps we could continue our conversation later." Dahlia watched as he led his niece to the dance floor, lifting her onto his boots so they could waltz together. The child's delighted giggles rose above the music, and something in Dahlia's chest ached at the sight. "He's good with children," came a voice beside her. Dahlia turned to find an older woman with silver-streaked hair observing her closely. "I'm Esther Wilkins," the woman continued, "town seamstress, and you must be our new schoolteacher." "Dahlia Turner," she confirmed. "And yes, the sheriff seems competent with his niece." Esther laughed softly. "Tucker Raines is competent at most things he sets his mind to. Been sheriff here going on 5 years now. Keeps the peace well enough even with those bank robbers causing trouble." "Have you known him long?" Dahlia found herself asking, curiosity getting the better of her. Since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, Esther replied. Watched him grow up after his folks took over the Rains ranch. Good family. His brother Daniel runs it now, with Tucker helping when he can. That's Daniel's daughter he's dancing with. Dahlia watched as the sheriff spun his niece around, both of them laughing. It was hard to reconcile this gentle man with the efficient lawman who'd drawn his gun with such deadly precision the day before. He's not married. The question slipped out before Dahlia could stop it. Esther's knowing smile made Dahlia blush. No, though not for lack of trying on the part of various young ladies. Tucker's always said he's waiting for the right woman, one who challenges him and doesn't just simper and agree with everything he says. She gave Dahlia a pointed look. I suspect he might find you interesting, Miss Turner. I'm not looking for a husband, Dahlia said firmly. I came here to teach. Of course, dear, Esther patted her arm. Now, let me introduce you to some of the mothers. They'll want to know who's teaching their little ones. As the evening progressed, Dahlia found herself gradually relaxing. The people of Ordway were genuinely welcoming, and several of her future students approached her with shy curiosity. She was in conversation with the general store owner's wife when Sheriff Rains approached again. Miss Turner, I believe you promised me a dance, he said confidently. I don't recall making such a promise, Sheriff, she replied, though without the earlier frost in her tone. Well then, would you do me the honor? He extended his hand, and for a moment Dahlia hesitated. One dance, she agreed finally, placing her hand in his. As he led her to the dance floor, she felt the curious eyes of the townspeople following them. The sheriff's hand at her waist was firm but respectful as he guided her through the steps of a waltz. You dance well, Miss Turner, he observed. My father insisted I learn. He said a lady should be accomplished in the social graces, she replied. And where is your family now? He asked. Dahlia's expression clouded. Gone, my father 5 years ago, my mother 3, I have no siblings. I'm sorry for your loss, he said sincerely. It can't have been easy coming all this way alone. I've grown accustomed to being alone, Sheriff. It's safer that way. His blue eyes studied her face. Someone hurt you badly, he stated rather than asked. Dahlia stiffened. My past is my own business. Of course, he agreed readily. But sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter. And sometimes trusting the wrong person destroys everything you've worked for, she countered. The music ended and Dahlia stepped back, breaking their connection. Thank you for the dance, Sheriff. If you'll excuse me, I should bid the mayor good night. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Of course, he said, tipping his head respectfully. Good night, Miss Turner. As Dahlia made her rounds saying goodbye, she couldn't help noticing that the sheriff watched her from across the room, his expression thoughtful. She pushed away the unbidden flutter in her stomach. Tucker Rains might seem different from Charles, but experience had taught her that men rarely showed their true colors until it was too late. Monday morning arrived with a clear blue sky and a classroom full of eager, if somewhat rowdy, students. Dahlia stood at the front of the room, surveying the 20-odd children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Good morning, she began, her voice firm but warm. I am Miss Turner and I will be your teacher. I expect you all to work hard and behave respectfully. In return, I promise to do my utmost to provide you with the education you deserve. The morning proceeded better than Dahlia had hoped. She assessed the students' various levels, organized them into groups, and began establishing a routine. Lily Rains proved to be as bright as she was talkative, while her cousin James, the sheriff's other nephew, was quieter but equally sharp. At noon, she dismissed the children for lunch, stepping outside herself to enjoy the fresh air. She was surprised to find Sheriff Rains leaning against the hitching post, holding a small basket. Sheriff, she acknowledged, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. Is there a problem? No, madam, he replied easily. Mrs. Wilkins at the cafe asked me to bring this by. Said she figured you might not have had time to pack a lunch on your first day. He held out the basket. Dahlia hesitated before accepting it. "That was thoughtful. Folks look out for each other here," he said simply. "How are the children behaving?" "Well enough." "Your niece and nephew are quite bright." Pride flashed across his face. "They come from good stock. Their mother, my sister-in-law, was a teacher before she married Daniel." "I see," Dahlia replied, opening the basket to find a sandwich, an apple, and a jar of lemonade. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she had indeed forgotten to prepare anything for herself that morning. "Mind if I join you?" the sheriff asked. "I'm on my rounds and could use a break." Dahlia considered refusing but found no polite way to do so. "I suppose that would be acceptable." They sat on the schoolhouse steps, and Dahlia tried to ignore how the sheriff's presence seemed to fill the space around her. She unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite, suddenly ravenous. "I hear you've taken to organizing the town library as well," Sheriff Raines commented. Dahlia glanced at him in surprise. "News travels fast. I only mentioned it to Mayor Hopkins yesterday after church." The sheriff shrugged. "Small town, those books have been gathering dust since the last teacher left. It's good they'll be put to use." "Books should never be neglected," Dahlia said with unexpected passion. "They're gateways to worlds beyond our own, full of knowledge and adventure." Tucker smiled at her enthusiasm. "You sound like my mother. She was always trying to get me to read more as a boy." "I was too busy chasing after my brother and getting into trouble." "And now you enforce the law instead of breaking it," Dahlia observed. "Life has a way of steering us down unexpected paths," he agreed. "What about you? Did you always want to be a teacher?" Dahlia took a sip of lemonade, considering her answer. "I always loved learning. After my parents died, teaching seemed the respectable choice for a woman on her own." She didn't mention how her plans to marry Charles had derailed that path temporarily, or how his betrayal had sent her scrambling back to it. "Well, Ordway is lucky to have you," Sheriff Raines said sincerely. "The children need someone who values education." Dahlia studied him curiously. "You surprise me, Sheriff. Most men I've known don't put much stock in schooling, especially for girls. My mother would have horsewhipped me if I ever suggested a woman shouldn't be educated," he said with a laugh. "She ran the ranch accounts better than my father ever could and made sure all of us, including my sisters, could read, write, and cipher." "Your sisters? You haven't mentioned them before." "They're both married and living in Denver now. Martha's husband is a banker, and Rebecca's runs a successful mercantile." Pride was evident in his voice. "They visit when they can, but it's a long journey." The conversation flowed more easily than Dahlia had expected, and she was surprised to find herself enjoying the sheriff's company. As the children began returning from their lunch break, Sheriff Raines stood and dusted off his trousers. "I should continue my rounds," he said. "Thank you for the company, Miss Turner." "Thank you for the lunch," she replied. "Please convey my gratitude to Mrs. Wilkins." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Miss Turner, some of us gather at the cafe on Friday evenings for dinner, nothing formal, just neighborly. You'd be welcome to join us." Dahlia hesitated. "I'll consider it," she said finally, not committing either way. He tipped his hat with a smile. "That's all I ask. Good day, Miss Turner." As the week progressed, Dahlia fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent teaching, afternoons organizing the neglected books in the small town library, and evenings preparing lessons and reading. She saw Sheriff Raines occasionally, usually on his rounds, and each time he greeted her politely but never pressed for more than she was willing to give. On Friday, after dismissing her students, Dahlia found herself considering his invitation. The thought of spending another evening alone in her small quarters suddenly seemed less appealing than it had before. Perhaps a quiet dinner among neighbors wouldn't be such a risk. She changed into a simple blue dress, pinned her hair, and made her way to the cafe as twilight settled over Ordway. Through the window, she could see several tables pushed together where Sheriff Raines sat with Dr. Peterson and his wife, the blacksmith, and several others she recognized from the social. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and conversations paused as heads turned in her direction. "Miss Turner," Sheriff Raines stood immediately, his face brightening. "You decided to join us after all." "I thought some company might be pleasant," she said, trying to sound casual. "We saved you a seat," he said, indicating an empty chair beside his. As she sat down, Mrs. Peterson leaned over with a warm smile. "We're so glad you came, dear. We were just discussing plans for the Founders' Day celebration next month." The conversation flowed around Dahlia, and she found herself gradually drawn in. These people genuinely seemed to care about their town and each other. When her beef stew arrived, she was surprised to discover it was exactly what she would have ordered. "I hope you don't mind," Sheriff Raines said quietly beside her. "I took the liberty of ordering for you when we saw you approaching. Mrs. Wilkins makes the best stew in the territory on Fridays." "It's fine," Dahlia assured him, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you." As the evening progressed, Dahlia found herself laughing more than she had in months. When the group finally began to disperse, Sheriff Raines offered to walk her back to the schoolhouse. "That's not necessary," she protested, though without much conviction. "Perhaps not necessary, but proper all the same," he insisted. "Besides, I'd like the company." The night air was cool as they walked side by side down Ordway's Main Street. Stars blanketed the sky above them, more brilliant than Dahlia had ever seen in St. Louis. "Thank you for convincing me to come tonight," she said after a comfortable silence. "It was nice." "I'm glad you enjoyed yourself," Sheriff Raines replied. "You have a beautiful laugh, Miss Turner." "You should use it more often." Dahlia felt a blush creeping up her cheeks and was grateful for the darkness. "You're very direct, Sheriff." "Tucker," he corrected gently. "When I'm not wearing the badge, I'm just Tucker." "Tucker," she repeated, testing the name. "I suppose when I'm not in the classroom, you could call me Dahlia," he smiled. "Dahlia, it suits you elegant and strong." They reached the schoolhouse too quickly for Dahlia's liking. As they stopped at her door, an awkward moment stretched between them. "Well, good night," she said finally. "Thank you for walking me home." "It was my pleasure," he replied. "Perhaps you'll join us again next Friday." Dahlia found herself nodding. "Perhaps I will." As Tucker tipped his hat and turned to leave, Dahlia felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. She'd enjoyed his company far more than she wanted to admit, yet the memory of Charles's betrayal lingered like a warning inside her quarters. Dahlia lit a lamp and sat at her small desk, trying to focus on lesson plans. Instead, her thoughts kept drifting to Tucker Raines, his easy smile, his obvious respect for the townspeople, the gentle way he'd guided her through conversations when she seemed uncomfortable. He seemed nothing like Charles, with his flashy clothes and grandiose promises. Tucker was steady, straightforward, and seemingly honest, but Charles had seemed honest too at first. Dahlia shook her head, forcing her attention back to her work. One pleasant evening didn't erase years of hard-earned caution. Tucker Raines might seem different, but she'd been fooled before. She wouldn't let her guard down so easily again. Over the next few weeks, Dahlia found herself being gradually pulled into the life of Ordway. She joined the Friday dinners regularly, attended church socials, and even helped organize a spelling bee for the children. To her surprise, Sheriff Raines Tucker, as she now thought of him, was often present but never intrusive. He seemed content to let her set the pace of their growing acquaintance. One Saturday morning in early October, Dahlia was working in the small library when a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a wagon pulling up, loaded with furniture and boxes. To her surprise, Tucker was helping to unload it alongside several other men. Curiosity getting the better of her, Dahlia stepped outside. "What's all this?" she asked Mrs. Wilkins, who was directing the men. "New books and furnishings for the library," the older woman explained proudly. Sheriff Raines wrote to his sister in Denver, and she convinced her husband's bank to make a donation to our town's educational resources. Dahlia watched in astonishment as the men carried in beautifully bound volumes, comfortable reading chairs, and even a proper librarian's desk to replace the rickety table she'd been using. "This is incredible," she breathed, running her fingers along the spine of a brand-new copy of Little Women. Tucker approached, carrying a heavy oak bookcase. "Where would you like this, Miss Turner?" he asked, his face flushed with exertion. "Against that wall, I think," she directed, then added, "Your sister's husband must be very generous." Tucker set down the bookcase and wiped his brow. Martha's always had a soft spot for books, and William knows better than to deny her anything. When I mentioned our library needed updating, she was all too happy to help. "When did you write to her?" Dahlia asked, curious about the timing. "After our first Friday dinner," he admitted. "You mentioned wanting to make the library a place where children could discover new worlds." "I thought this might help." Dahlia was speechless. The thoughtfulness of the gesture and the effort it represented touched her deeply. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. Tucker smiled. "You don't have to say anything, just keep doing what you're doing, helping this town grow and learn." Before she could respond, he was called away to help with another piece of furniture. Dahlia watched him go, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. No one had ever listened to her dreams and then acted to make them a reality before. Charles had always dismissed her love of books as a frivolous female pursuit. By afternoon, the library had been transformed. Dahlia stood in the center of the room, taking in the new bookshelves lined with volumes, the comfortable reading area, and the neat desk where she could work. It was better than she could have imagined. "Do you approve?" Tucker asked, coming to stand beside her after the other volunteers had left. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "The children will be thrilled." "And their teacher?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. Dahlia met his gaze. "Their teacher is deeply touched by your kindness." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Dahlia felt the walls around her heart trembling slightly, and it frightened her even as it exhilarated her. "Would you care to join me for a ride tomorrow after church?" Tucker asked suddenly. "The aspens are turning in the foothills, and it's a sight worth seeing." Dahlia hesitated. A ride alone with Tucker would be different from the group dinners and social gatherings where she'd grown accustomed to his presence. "I don't have a horse," she said, grasping at the practical excuse. "I can borrow my brother's mare for you. She's gentle as a lamb," he countered smoothly. Dahlia bit her lip, torn between caution and a growing desire to spend time with this man who continued to surprise her. "I suppose a short ride couldn't hurt," she conceded finally. Tucker's smile could have lit the room. "Wonderful. I'll come by after the service tomorrow." Where something warm, it can get chilly in the hills. As he left, Dahlia wondered if she was making a mistake. Every instinct honed by painful experience warned her to keep her distance, yet something about Tucker Raines made her want to take the risk. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for a ride. After church, Dahlia hurried back to her quarters to change into her one riding skirt, a dark green wool she rarely had occasion to wear. She was just pinning her hat when a knock came at her door. Tucker stood outside, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy black gelding and a dappled gray mare with a gentle eye. He'd exchanged his usual work clothes for a clean shirt and jacket, though he still wore his gun belt, a necessity even on a Sunday outing in the territories. "Miss Turner," he greeted her with a warm smile. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, feeling unaccountably shy. "Is that to be my mount?" She indicated the gray mare. "This is Daisy," Tucker confirmed, patting the horse's neck. "Steady as they come, my niece Lily often rides her." With practiced ease, Tucker helped Dahlia into the saddle, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach that she firmly ignored. They rode out of town at an easy pace, Tucker pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. As they climbed into the foothills, the landscape transformed into a tapestry of gold and crimson as the aspen trees displayed their autumn colors. "It's breathtaking," Dahlia said as they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley ablaze with color. "This is my favorite time of year," Tucker admitted. "Everything changing, preparing for the long sleep before rebirth." They dismounted to rest the horses, and Tucker spread a blanket on a sunny patch of grass. From his saddlebags, he produced a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. "I'm not much of a cook," he said apologetically, "but I thought you might be hungry." "It's perfect," Dahlia assured him, settling onto the blanket. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze and the occasional snort from the grazing horses. "May I ask you something personal?" Tucker said eventually. Dahlia tensed slightly but nodded. "You may ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough," he agreed with a small smile. "What brought you to Ordway? Most people don't leave civilization for a tiny town unless they're running to something or from something." Dahlia considered deflecting the question but found herself wanting to share at least part of her story. "I needed a fresh start," she said carefully. "St. Louis held too many painful memories." Tucker nodded, not pressing for details. "I understand. Sometimes a change of scenery is the only way forward." "Is that what brought you to Ordway?" she asked, turning the question back on him. A shadow crossed his face. "In a way. I was a deputy in Denver for a time, but after a bank robbery went wrong and my partner was killed, I needed something different. My brother suggested I come home and take over as sheriff here when old Sheriff Blackwell retired." "I'm sorry about your partner," Dahlia said softly. Tucker looked out over the valley. "Jake was a good man, died protecting a mother and child when the robbers started shooting. I couldn't save him." The pain in his voice was raw and real. Without thinking, Dahlia reached out and touched his hand. "It wasn't your fault." He turned his hand to grasp hers gently. "Some days I believe that, others not so much." Their eyes met, and Dahlia felt something shift between them, a shared understanding of loss and regret. After a moment, she withdrew her hand, unnerved by the connection. Tucker respected her retreat and changed the subject to lighter matters: town gossip, amusing stories about his niece and nephew, plans for the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. By the time they mounted up to return to town, Dahlia found herself more relaxed in Tucker's company than she could have imagined possible. As they rode back, the sun beginning its descent toward the western mountains, she admitted to herself that she was enjoying his company far too much for her own good. When they reached the schoolhouse, Tucker dismounted and came around to help her down. His hands at her waist were gentle but firm, and as her feet touched the ground, she found herself standing very close to him, looking up into eyes that reflected the endless Colorado sky. "Thank you for today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The pleasure was mine," he replied, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Dahlia knew she should refuse, keep her distance, protect her heart. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'd like that." Tucker's smile was like sunrise. "Good night, Dahlia," he said softly, using her given name for the first time that day. "Good night, Tucker," she replied, turning quickly to hide the blush she felt warming her cheeks. Inside her quarters, Dahlia leaned against the closed door, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the day's ride. This was dangerous. She was beginning to care for Tucker Raines in a way she'd sworn never to care for a man again. Yet as she prepared for bed, she couldn't stop thinking about his smile, his honesty about his partner's death, the gentle way he'd helped her onto her horse. Tucker wasn't Charles, she knew that intellectually. But her heart had been wrong before, and the stakes were too high to risk another mistake. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself as she blew out her lamp. Just one day at a time. The days turned into weeks, and October gave way to November. Dahlia found herself spending more time with Tucker: Sunday rides when weather permitted, walks after school, quiet conversations in the library. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give, content to let their friendship develop at her pace. The town noticed, of course. Ordway was too small for anything to go unobserved, and the developing relationship between their sheriff and schoolteacher was a source of gentle gossip and approval. Mrs. Wilkins often gave Dahlia knowing looks when Tucker stopped by the cafe while she was there, and Mayor Hopkins had taken to referring to them as our young couple when speaking to others, though never directly to Dahlia. Founders' Day arrived with great fanfare. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which included games for the children, a shooting contest, a pie competition, and dancing in the evening. Dahlia had helped her students prepare recitations and a small play about the town's history, which was received with enthusiastic applause. "Your students did wonderfully," Tucker said, finding her after the performance. He looked handsome in his best clothes, his badge polished to a high shine for the occasion. "They worked very hard," Dahlia replied proudly. "I'm pleased with their progress." "Everyone's talking about how much the school has improved since you arrived," he told her. "Mayor Hopkins says enrollment is up by 5 students since September." Dahlia blushed at the praise. "The children just needed some structure and encouragement. They're naturally bright." As the afternoon wore on, Dahlia found herself drawn into the festivities. She cheered for her students in the 3-legged race, sampled Mrs. Peterson's award-winning apple pie, and even tried her hand at the ring toss, much to the delight of the children. When Tucker took his turn at the shooting contest, Dahlia watched with interest. She'd never seen him use his gun except during the bank robbery on her first day in town. His movements were fluid and precise as he drew and fired, hitting all 5 targets in rapid succession. The crowd erupted in applause as Tucker accepted his prize, a silver belt buckle, with a modest nod. "Impressive shooting, Sheriff," Dahlia said when he rejoined her. "A necessary skill in my line of work," he replied, though she could tell he was pleased by her acknowledgement. "Though I hope never to need it for anything more serious than a contest." As evening approached, tables were cleared away to make room for dancing. Lanterns were strung across the town square, casting a warm glow over the gathering as musicians set up on a small platform. "May I have the first dance?" Tucker asked, extending his hand to Dahlia as the music began. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "You may." As they moved together to the lively tune, Dahlia was acutely aware of Tucker's hand at her waist, the clean scent of his soap, and the admiring glances cast their way. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, he drew her slightly closer, still respecting the proper distance for a public dance. "You look beautiful tonight," he said softly, his eyes never leaving her face. Dahlia had taken special care with her appearance, wearing a new burgundy dress she'd ordered from Denver and arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than usual. "Thank you," she replied, finding it difficult to maintain her composure under his steady gaze. "Dahlia," Tucker began, his voice serious, "I've been wanting to ask you something." Before he could continue, a commotion at the edge of the square drew their attention. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. Tucker immediately released Dahlia and moved toward the newcomer, his hand instinctively going to his gun. "Sheriff," the rider called, pulling his exhausted horse to a stop. "The bank robbers, the ones from before, they've been spotted heading this way. The marshal from Pueblo sent me to warn you. They're planning to hit the bank again tonight while everyone's distracted with the celebration." A murmur of alarm spread through the crowd. Tucker immediately took charge, his voice calm but authoritative. "Everyone remain calm. Mr. Peterson, get the women and children into the church. Mr. Williams, secure the bank. Any men who can handle a gun, meet me at my office in 5 minutes." The festivities dissolved into controlled chaos as people hurried to follow Tucker's instructions. He turned to Dahlia, his expression grave. "You should go to the church with the others," he said. "I need to make sure all my students are accounted for first," she replied, already scanning the dispersing crowd for her charges. Tucker nodded, understanding her responsibility. "Be careful," he said, squeezing her hand briefly before striding toward his office. Dahlia quickly gathered her students, counting heads and directing them toward the church with their parents. As she shepherded the last stragglers, she couldn't help worrying about Tucker. These were the same men who had shot at them on her first day in Ordway. Dangerous, desperate men with nothing to lose. By the time everyone was safely in the church, Tucker and a group of deputized townsmen had taken up positions around the bank and Main Street. Dahlia paced anxiously near the church window, watching the street where occasional movement could be seen as men changed positions in the gathering darkness. "He'll be fine," Mrs. Wilkins said, coming to stand beside her. "Tucker knows what he's doing." "Those men are dangerous," Dahlia replied, unable to hide her concern. The older woman gave her a knowing look. "You care for him?" It wasn't a question, but Dahlia felt compelled to answer anyway. "I do," she admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "More than I should, perhaps." "Love's never been about should, dear," Mrs. Wilkins said gently. "It just is." Before Dahlia could respond, gunfire erupted outside. Women screamed and children began to cry as the sounds of a fierce gun battle filled the night air. Dahlia's heart lodged in her throat as she tried to see what was happening, but the darkness and distance made it impossible to distinguish individuals. The shooting seemed to go on forever, though in reality it lasted only a few minutes. When it finally ceased, an eerie silence fell over the town. Dahlia stood frozen by the window, straining to see any movement in the street. Finally, a figure appeared, walking toward the church. Even in the dim light, Dahlia recognized Tucker's tall form. Without thinking, she rushed to the door and threw it open, ignoring Mrs. Wilkins's call to be careful. Tucker was limping slightly, his face smudged with dirt and gunpowder, but otherwise appeared unharmed. When he saw Dahlia in the doorway, relief washed over his features. "It's over," he announced to the anxious crowd gathering behind her. "We got 2 of them and the others fled." No townspeople were hurt, though Bill Taylor took a graze to the arm. A cheer went up from the church, but Dahlia barely heard it. She was focused entirely on Tucker, on the fact that he was alive and standing before her. Without caring who might see or what they might think, she threw her arms around him in a fierce embrace. "You're all right," she whispered against his chest. Tucker's arms came around her, holding her close. "I'm all right," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "Everyone's safe." When Dahlia finally pulled back, embarrassed by her public display, Tucker kept hold of her hand. "I need to help get things sorted out," he said. "Will you wait for me? There's something I still need to ask you." Dahlia nodded, her heart racing. "I'll wait." It was well past midnight when order was finally restored. The wounded robbers had been treated by the doctor and locked in the jail, the dead man's body removed to the undertaker's, and the frightened townspeople reassured. Dahlia had helped comfort the children and assisted Mrs. Peterson in providing coffee and food to the men who had fought to protect the town. When Tucker finally found her, sitting alone on a bench outside the now empty church, exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. Yet his eyes lit up at the sight of her. "You're still here," he said, lowering himself to sit beside her. "I said I would wait," she replied simply. Tucker took a deep breath, then reached for her hand. "What I wanted to ask you earlier before all this happened, Dahlia, would you allow me to court you properly?" Despite everything that had happened that evening, despite all her previous resolutions, Dahlia found herself smiling. "I thought you already were." Tucker's laugh was relieved and joyful. "I suppose I was, but I wanted to make it official. I know you've been hurt before, you don't have to tell me how or by whom, but I want you to know that I would never intentionally cause you pain. I care for you, Dahlia, more than I've ever cared for anyone." Dahlia looked into his earnest face and felt the last of her reservations crumbling. "I care for you too, Tucker, and yes, I would like very much for you to court me properly." His smile was brighter than all the lanterns in the square had been. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Tucker leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth coursing through her entire body. When they parted, Dahlia felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. The walls she'd built around her heart hadn't exactly fallen, but they had definitely developed a significant breach where Tucker Raines was concerned. "I should walk you home," Tucker said, standing and offering his hand. "It's been a long day." They walked in comfortable silence through the quiet town, Tucker's hand warm around hers. At her door, he kissed her again, this time with slightly more passion, though still within the bounds of propriety. "Good night, Dahlia," he whispered. "Sweet dreams." "Good night, Tucker," she replied, watching him walk away before closing her door. As she prepared for bed, Dahlia realized that for the first time since Charles's betrayal, she was allowing herself to hope for a future that included love. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "One day at a time," she reminded herself. "He's earning my trust day by day." Winter descended on Ordway with a vengeance that year. By early December, snow lay thick on the ground and travel became difficult. School continued, though attendance was sporadic when the weather was particularly harsh. Tucker made it a point to check on Dahlia daily, often bringing firewood or supplies to ensure she was comfortable in her small quarters. Their courtship progressed steadily, with Tucker respecting Dahlia's need for caution while steadily demonstrating his reliability and affection. They spent evenings reading by the fire in the library, took sleigh rides when the weather permitted, and shared quiet dinners in the cafe where their relationship had first begun to bloom. As Christmas approached, excitement filled the town despite the cold. The children were preparing a pageant under Dahlia's direction, and everyone was busy with secret gift-making and preparations for the holiday celebration. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the library after finishing the Christmas decorations, Tucker seemed unusually quiet. Dahlia, who had grown adept at reading his moods, sensed something was troubling him. "Is everything all right?" she asked, setting aside the book she'd been reading aloud. Tucker looked up, his expression serious. "I received a telegram today from the U.S. Marshal in Denver. They want me to testify at the trial of those bank robbers we captured. I'll need to leave for Denver the day after Christmas and likely be gone for at least 2 weeks." "Oh," Dahlia said, trying to hide her disappointment. She'd been looking forward to spending the holiday season with him. "Of course you must go. It's your duty." Tucker reached for her hand. "I hate leaving you, especially now, but Daniel will keep an eye on things here while I'm gone, and Deputy Wilson is capable enough for a short period." "I'll be fine," Dahlia assured him, though the thought of not seeing him for 2 weeks created a hollow feeling in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. "Denver isn't so very far." "Far enough," Tucker replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Dahlia, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you." The seriousness of his tone made her heart skip. "Yes. I've been thinking about the future, our future. I know we haven't been courting long, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. When I return from Denver, if you're willing, I'd like to speak to you about more permanent arrangements." Dahlia's breath caught. "Tucker, are you?" "Not yet," he said quickly. "This isn't a proposal, not properly. But I want you to know that's where my heart is heading, so you can consider whether it's what you want too." Emotion welled in Dahlia's chest, joy mixed with the lingering fear that had become her constant companion since Charles's betrayal. "I don't know what to say." Tucker smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything now. Just think about it while I'm gone. When I return, we can talk more." He leaned forward and kissed her softly, his hand cradling her cheek with tender reverence. Dahlia allowed herself to lean into his touch, to trust in the warmth and sincerity she found there. "I should get you home before the snow gets worse," Tucker said, reluctantly breaking the kiss. "The children will be expecting their teacher bright and early tomorrow." As they walked through the silent, snow-covered town, arm in arm against the cold, Dahlia felt both apprehension and hope battling within her. The thought of Tucker leaving, even temporarily, filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. Yet his words about their future together kindled a warmth that no winter chill could touch. At her door, Tucker held her close for a long moment. 2 weeks will pass quickly," he said, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "Be careful in Denver," Dahlia replied. "Those men have friends who might not want you to testify." Tucker's expression softened at her concern. "I'll be careful, and I'll return to you as soon as I can." His kiss goodbye was more passionate than usual, a promise of things to come. As Dahlia watched him walk away through the falling snow, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Tucker Rains, despite all her vows to guard her heart. The thought was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Christmas arrived with all the joy and festivity a small frontier town could muster. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, the children's pageant went off with only minor mishaps, and gifts were exchanged with genuine delight. Tucker gave Dahlia a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages waiting to be filled with her thoughts and dreams. In return, she presented him with a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes, having secretly worked on it during quiet evenings alone. "It's perfect," he said, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "I'll wear it in Denver and think of you." The day after Christmas dawned clear but bitterly cold. Dahlia stood on the platform of Ordway's small train station, watching as Tucker secured his bag in the compartment. When he turned to her, his expression was torn between duty and desire to stay. "2 weeks," he reminded her, taking her gloved hands in his. "I'll write every day." "I'll be here when you return," Dahlia promised, surprising herself with how certain she felt about that commitment. The train whistle blew, signaling the final boarding call. Tucker pulled Dahlia into a brief, fierce embrace, then kissed her quickly before stepping onto the train. She stood watching as the engine pulled away, Tucker's face at the window until the train rounded a bend and disappeared from sight. Walking back to the schoolhouse, Dahlia felt oddly empty, as though a vital part of her day had been removed. She hadn't realized how accustomed she'd grown to Tucker's presence, his morning greetings, his quiet strength, the way his smile seemed reserved just for her. The days passed slowly. True to his word, Tucker wrote daily, his letters arriving in bundles every few days due to the train schedule. He described the trial preparations, his meetings with the prosecutor, his visits with his sisters. Each letter closed with increasingly tender expressions of his feelings and his eagerness to return to Ordway to her. Dahlia threw herself into preparing for the new school term, reorganizing the library and spending time with the friends she'd made in town. Mrs. Wilkins invited her for tea regularly, as did Mrs. Peterson. Daniel Rains and his wife Rebecca made a point of including her in family dinners, where Lily and James regaled her with stories about their uncle's childhood misadventures. Yet despite these distractions, Dahlia found herself checking the calendar daily, counting down to Tucker's return. She'd written to him as well, her letters more reserved than his but gradually revealing more of her feelings as the days passed. On the day Tucker was due to return, a fierce blizzard swept through Colorado, halting all train service. Dahlia received a telegram explaining the delay, promising he'd be on the first train once the tracks were cleared. Her disappointment was acute but tempered by concern for his safety. 3 more days passed before word came that the trains were running again. Dahlia could hardly concentrate on teaching, her mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Tucker's imminent return. When school finally dismissed, she hurried to her quarters to change her dress and fix her hair before making her way to the station. The train was late, delayed by the still difficult conditions on the tracks. Dahlia paced the platform anxiously, ignoring the cold as darkness fell and lanterns were lit. Finally, the distant whistle announced the train's approach, and Dahlia's heart began to race. As passengers disembarked, Dahlia scanned each face anxiously. Then, through the swirling snow, she saw him taller than most, his familiar stride unmistakable even at a distance. He hadn't spotted her yet, his attention on navigating the icy platform with his bag. "Tucker," she called, unable to contain herself any longer. His head snapped up, eyes searching until they found her. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. In moments he was before her, dropping his bag to the platform and sweeping her into his arms. "Dahlia," he breathed, holding her as if she might disappear. God, I missed you. I missed you too, she admitted freely, all her usual reserve forgotten in the joy of his return. Tucker pulled back just enough to look into her face, his eyes drinking in every detail. You're even more beautiful than I remembered, he said softly, then lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that spoke of 3 weeks of separation and longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless despite the cold, Tucker pressed his forehead to hers. I don't ever want to be away from you that long again, he said. Then don't go, she replied simply. Tucker laughed, the sound filled with happiness. Let's get out of this cold, he suggested, retrieving his bag with one hand while keeping the other firmly around her waist. I have so much to tell you. They made their way to the cafe, which was warm and welcoming despite the late hour. Mrs. Wilkins fussed over Tucker's return, bringing them hot coffee and her best apple pie while discreetly ensuring they had a private corner to themselves. As they shed their snowy outer garments, Dahlia noticed that Tucker was indeed wearing the scarf she'd made him. The sight filled her with a warm contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The trial went well, Tucker explained as they settled at their table. All 3 men were convicted and sentenced to 20 years. They won't be troubling Ordway or any other town for a long while. I'm glad, Dahlia said sincerely. Were your sisters well? Very well. They send their regards and express great curiosity about the woman who's captured their brother's heart. Tucker's eyes twinkled. Martha insisted I bring you this. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Dahlia opened it carefully to find a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a book, its cover etched with tiny flowers. It's beautiful, she breathed, touching it reverently. Martha said every teacher should have something to remind her of the power of words, Tucker explained. She's eager to meet you someday. I'd like that, Dahlia replied, genuinely touched by the gesture from a woman she'd never met. They talked for hours, making up for their time apart. Tucker described Denver's growth since Dahlia had last passed through, shared stories of his reunion with his sisters, and recounted the trial in detail. In turn, Dahlia told him about her days in Ordway, the progress of her students, the library's increasing popularity, the town gossip he'd missed. It was late when they finally left the cafe, the storm having abated somewhat. Tucker insisted on walking Dahlia to her quarters despite his obvious exhaustion from travel. At her door, he paused, suddenly serious. Dahlia, do you remember what I said before I left? About discussing our future when I returned, Dahlia nodded, her heart beginning to race. I remember. Tucker took both her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. These 3 weeks away from you were the longest of my life. Every day I woke thinking of you. Every night I fell asleep with your last letter in my hand. I know what I want now with absolute certainty. He dropped to one knee in the snow, still holding her hands. Dahlia Turner, I love you. I want to spend my life with you, protecting you, cherishing you, building a future together. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Dahlia looked down at Tucker, this man who had patiently worked to earn her trust day by day, who had respected her boundaries while gently showing her that not all men were like Charles, who had brought joy and hope back into her life when she'd believed such things were lost to her forever. The last of her reservations melted away like snow in sunshine. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Yes, Tucker, I will marry you. His smile was blinding as he rose and gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I visited a jeweler in Denver, he explained, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond set between 2 sapphires. The blue reminded me of the Colorado sky on the day we first rode to see the aspens. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Dahlia stared at it in wonder, then up at Tucker's face, her future husband's face. I love you, she said, speaking the words aloud for the first time. "I never thought I'd say that to a man again, but I love you, Tucker Raines." His kiss was tender, reverent, a sealed promise between them. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears of joy. "When?" Tucker asked simply. "Spring," Dahlia replied without hesitation. "When the aspens are green again," Tucker nodded, clearly pleased with her answer. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late and propriety demands I leave you at your door, much as I wish to stay." Dahlia blushed at his implication but nodded. "Soon enough we won't have to say good night." Tucker's eyes darkened at her words. "Soon," he agreed, stealing one last kiss before forcing himself to step back. "Dream of me tonight, Dahlia." "I will," she promised, watching as he walked away through the moonlit snow, turning back once to wave. Inside her quarters, Dahlia lit a lamp and moved to her small writing desk. Opening the new journal Tucker had given her for Christmas, she began to write, recording this most precious of evenings in detail. As she wrote, her eye caught on the gleam of her engagement ring in the lamplight. "He earned my trust," she whispered to herself, "day by day." The news of their engagement spread through Ordway like wildfire. By noon the following day, it seemed everyone in town had heard and was eager to offer congratulations. Dahlia's students were particularly excited, the younger ones asking if they could call her Mrs. Raines already, while the older girls sighed romantically over the sheriff's proposal in the snow. Plans for a spring wedding commenced almost immediately. Mrs. Wilkins appointed herself unofficial coordinator, while Mrs. Peterson offered her extensive garden for the ceremony. Tucker's sister, Martha, wrote offering to send fabric for a wedding dress, and his other sister, Rebecca, promised to come early to help with preparations. Through it all, Tucker was a steady, joyful presence at Dahlia's side. Their courtship continued even as they planned their future together, with Tucker insisting they still make time for rides, walks, and quiet evenings alone amidst the whirlwind of wedding preparations. On a crisp March evening, as they sat by the fire in the library after everyone else had gone home, Tucker broached a subject they'd only discussed in passing. "I've been thinking about where we'll live after the wedding," he began, taking Dahlia's hand as was his habit now. "My quarters above the jail are hardly suitable for a married couple." Dahlia nodded. She'd seen his small, Spartan rooms and couldn't imagine them sharing such a cramped space. "I've saved quite a bit over the years," Tucker continued. "Enough to buy that plot of land on the east edge of town and build a proper house. Nothing elaborate, but comfortable 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, maybe a study where you could continue your writing." Dahlia had begun keeping a journal of her experiences in Ordway and had recently confided to Tucker her childhood dream of someday writing stories for children. He had encouraged her enthusiasm, bringing her books on composition from Denver and reading her early efforts with genuine interest. "3 bedrooms?" she asked, a blush coloring her cheeks. Tucker's eyes softened. "One for us, one for guests, and one for future possibilities." He squeezed her hand. "I'd like children, Dahlia, a family of our own, but only if that's what you want too." The thought of children, of Tucker's children, filled Dahlia with unexpected longing. "I'd like that very much," she admitted, "though perhaps we should start with the house and see where life leads us." Tucker's smile was tender. "We have all the time in the world." As winter grudgingly gave way to spring, wedding preparations accelerated. The fabric for Dahlia's dress arrived from Denver, a creamy silk that Mrs. Wilkins declared would make our sheriff swallow his tongue when he sees you in it. Tucker's sisters arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, bringing gifts and endless stories about their brother's childhood that made Dahlia laugh until her sides ached. The night before the wedding, the women of Ordway held a small gathering for Dahlia in the library, while the men took Tucker to the saloon for a more raucous celebration. Surrounded by the women who had become her friends over the past months, Dahlia felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Martha asked as they sat enjoying cake and tea. Dahlia considered the question. "Not about marrying Tucker," she said honestly. but about being the center of attention, a little, Rebecca laughed. Tucker's exactly the same. He'd have preferred to whisk you off to Denver and marry quietly, but he knows how much the town wanted to celebrate with you both. My brother is a changed man since meeting you, Martha added. I've never seen him so happy, so settled in his own skin. He changed me too, Dahlia admitted. I came to Ordway determined never to trust a man again. Tucker taught me that trust can be rebuilt with patience and consistency. Mrs. Wilkins raised her teacup in a toast. To new beginnings, she said, her eyes twinkling, and to the children you'll be blessed with soon enough. Dahlia blushed deeply as the women laughed and echoed the toast. Yet as embarrassing as their teasing was, she couldn't deny the warm anticipation she felt at the thought of becoming Tucker's wife in every sense. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of their union. Mrs. Peterson's garden was in full bloom, creating a natural cathedral of flowers and greenery. Townspeople arrived early, dressed in their Sunday best, eager to witness the joining of their sheriff and schoolteacher. In a room at the Peterson home, Dahlia stood still as Martha and Rebecca made final adjustments to her dress and veil. The gown was simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves that Mrs. Wilkins had painstakingly attached. You look beautiful, Martha said, stepping back to admire her work. Tucker won't know what hit him. A knock at the door heralded Mrs. Peterson. It's time, dear, she said warmly. Everyone's ready, and Tucker is about to wear a hole in my garden path with his pacing. Dahlia took a deep breath, suddenly overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. She was about to bind her life to Tucker's, to promise before God and their community to love and honor him for all their days. The magnitude of it was breathtaking. Are you ready? Rebecca asked gently. Dahlia nodded, unable to speak. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Dahlia would later remember snippets, the hushed murmur of the crowd as she appeared at the garden gate, the look of stunned adoration on Tucker's face when he saw her, the warmth of his hands holding hers as they spoke their vows, the gentle pressure of his lips as they sealed their promises with a kiss. I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Tucker Raines, the minister announced to enthusiastic applause. Afterward, the entire town celebrated with a feast and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Dahlia danced with her new husband, with his brother Daniel, with Mayor Hopkins, and even with little James, who solemnly informed her that now she was officially his aunt. As twilight deepened, Tucker found her watching the dancers from a quiet corner. Are you happy, Mrs. Raines? He asked softly, offering her a glass of punch. Completely, she replied, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. Though I'm also ready to be alone with my husband. Tucker's eyes darkened at her words. I was hoping you'd say that, he admitted. Our carriage is waiting whenever you're ready to make our escape. They said their goodbyes amid knowing smiles and good-natured teasing, then slipped away to where a carriage waited to take them to the small cabin Tucker had arranged for their wedding night. The house he was building for them wasn't yet complete, and they had decided to postpone a proper honeymoon trip until summer, when travel would be easier. The cabin was simple but romantic, with a fire already lit in the grate and flowers on the small table. Tucker carried Dahlia over the threshold, setting her down gently in the warm, flickering light. Welcome home, Mrs. Raines, he said softly, his voice husky with emotion. Dahlia looked up at her husband, this man who had patiently earned her trust day by day, who had helped her believe in love again when she'd thought it impossible. I love you, Tucker, she whispered, more than I ever thought possible. His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as they gave themselves to each other completely, sealing their vows in the most intimate way. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Dahlia rested her head on Tucker's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. What are you thinking? He asked, his fingers gently combing through her unbound hair. That I'm grateful I came to Ordway, she replied honestly. That day I arrived the bank robbery, meeting you it seemed like the worst possible welcome. Now I see it was the beginning of everything good in my life. Tucker's arms tightened around her. I knew from that first day that you were special, Dahlia. Even with dirt on your face and fury in your eyes, you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Dahlia laughed softly, remembering her disheveled state after diving for cover. I thought you were arrogant and overconfident. And now? He teased, his hand tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. She raised herself on one elbow to look into his face, suddenly serious. Now I think you're the best man I've ever known. Honorable, kind, patient. She traced his jawline with gentle fingers. You rebuilt my faith in love, Tucker. Day by day, just as you promised, his kiss was achingly tender. I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that faith, he vowed. I know, Dahlia replied simply, settling back into his embrace. That's why I love you. Outside their snug cabin, spring unfurled across the Colorado landscape, promising new life and growth. Inside, Dahlia and Tucker Raines began their own new chapter, built on a foundation of trust earned day by day and love that would only strengthen with the passing years. 5 years later, Dahlia Raines stood on the porch of their home at the edge of Ordway, watching as Tucker demonstrated rope tricks for their son. 4-year-old Thomas was the image of his father, with the same sandy hair and blue eyes, while 2-year-old Elizabeth, napping inside, had inherited Dahlia's chestnut curls and green eyes. The house Tucker had promised was now a reality, a comfortable 2-story home with a wide porch where they gathered on summer evenings. Dahlia still taught at the school 3 days a week, having arranged to share duties with a young woman from Denver when Elizabeth was born. In her spare time, she wrote stories for children, and her first book was due to be published in the fall. Tucker continued as sheriff, though he'd taken on a full-time deputy to allow him more time with his family. His reputation for fairness and integrity had spread throughout the territory, and he'd recently been approached about running for state office, an idea he was considering with Dahlia's encouragement. "Mama, look," Thomas called excitedly. "I did it." Dahlia applauded as her son successfully twirled the small practice rope Tucker had made for him. "Wonderful, sweetheart. You'll be as good as your father in no time." Tucker grinned and ruffled the boy's hair. "A few more years of practice, son, and you'll be better than me." A cry from inside the house signaled that Elizabeth was awake from her nap. "I'll get her," Tucker said, kissing Dahlia's cheek as he passed. Dahlia watched her son continue practicing, her heart full to bursting with contentment. The bitter, wounded woman who had arrived in Ordway 6 years ago would hardly recognize the life she now lived surrounded by love, secure in her husband's devotion, blessed with children and purpose. Tucker emerged with Elizabeth on his hip, the little girl still sleepy-eyed but smiling at the sight of her mother. "Someone wants her mama," he said, transferring their daughter to Dahlia's waiting arms. As Dahlia settled in the porch swing with Elizabeth, Tucker called to Thomas to put away his rope for supper. The boy complied with minimal grumbling, racing inside to wash his hands as instructed. Tucker joined Dahlia on the swing, his arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "You know, I was just thinking about that day we met, how I told you I'd never trust a man again." Tucker chuckled, the sound rumbling beneath her ear, "and I said I'd earn it day by day." "You did," Dahlia said softly. "You still do." His kiss was as tender as their first, filled with the love that had grown between them through days of joy and challenge, through the births of their children, through building a life together in this small frontier town. "I love you, Dahlia Raines," Tucker murmured against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, their daughter contentedly nestled between them. Every day more than the day before. Inside, Thomas called that he was hungry, breaking the moment. Tucker laughed and stood, extending his hand to help Dahlia up. Together, they went inside to join their son, a family built on promises kept and trust earned day by day. The end.